All right, so it's time to jump in and start customizing all of the security stuff. But before we do so, I want to take a look at kind of the generated application as is and just look around and find out where things are before we start customizing them. So the first thing is I'm actually going to fire up this application from terminal. And so I'm going to run yarn start. If you get an error doing so, you may need to install your dependencies. You can just run yarn install to make that happen. And then once this is done loading, it's going to fire up localhost 9000 and our front end will be available. And then we can go ahead and make changes to our front end when we need to, and we're ready to go. So here's our application. We'll come back to that in a second. So let's take a look around the directory structure here. And if we jump in and we have Java, under the config folder package, we have security configuration. And so anybody who's ever done any Spring security work before will kind of notice this, be familiar with this. So we have a class here, security configuration, extends web security configure adapter. And that's a configuration class, enable web security. And this, again, should look pretty familiar. We have a user details service in here. That's going to be detail service for Spring security. And there's a bunch of stuff going on here. I'll just mention a couple. So we do register some AJAX, authentication, success handler, and failure handler. Those are classes within JHipster that we're going to use. We may come back and actually have to remove those and use our own if we want to do some more customization. So we might look at that as well. And then if we go down here, we have our normal configure method, and it's going to configure Spring Security. So we have CSRF, we have our form login here. Here's our login processing URL. This is for logout. And then we have all of our authorization requests here. And we're permitting all to things like API register, activate, authenticate. And then we're also doing things like we're making sure that we have admin authentication for things like management and the Swagger UI stuff. So this is our normal Spring security stuff. If we come back, there is a security package here as well that has some more stuff. So again, we're using social logins. So there'll be a social package here. And this custom sign-in adapter is actually what makes all of that kind of work, the glue between the details service and JHipster here. So we have that. And then we have some just a few classes kind of related to the security stuff. And this is where we're going to really start to customize things. Later in this section, we're going to dive into kind of customizing the security so that if somebody were to log in with 10 invalid attempts, then we're going to kind of block them and not allow them to try and, log in anymore to really kind of help us prevent like a DDoS attack. So this is where all of that kind of logic is going to live. So then if we go back to our UI here, this may look familiar. We can go ahead and sign in. These are our social logins, but right out of the box, they actually don't do anything. You need to do a couple things to configure them. So we'll look at doing that. And then if you want, you can go ahead and log in here. So we go admin, and then we see that we are logged in and we have the ability to do more things. Now, as far as the front end goes, if we jump back into our code and we go to web app, if we look under app and shared, there is a login folder. And so we have a login component, and this is kind of the main entry point. This is our TypeScript component for logging in. And if we look at our HTML here, here's the actual form, and you'll see that form has a ng submit, and that submits to login. So when we get into login, there's actually a login service that handles this. So if we jump over there, that actually returns a new promise, but that actually calls an authenticated server provider. So if we look at that, this is where the actual kind of magic happens, where we set our username, our password, and our remember me as part of the data. And then we do an HTTP post over to our Spring Boot application under API authentication. So that's kind of the front end of things and the back end of things. Again, you might already be familiar with this if you're used to JHipster applications up until now. But I just wanted to take a second and walk around that. And in the rest of this section, we will start to customize some different security options. We're going to add social login for both Facebook and Twitter, and then we'll take a look at kind of blocking after max attempts, and we'll set that to 10 so we can block against, again, trying to combat against DDoS attacks there. So we'll do all that in this section, but I hope this gave you a nice overview of the security features in JHipster. And with that, let's go ahead and move on.